Hello there, welcome to another English Language A-Level video with me, Paul, from the QE here in Darlington. And this video is about language diversity meeting language discourses. So we're getting you prepared for the sorts of things that you're doing on the AQA Paper 2, where you're deconstructing journalists' articles writing about language topics, and then you have a go at doing your own opinion article in response to those things. So we're going to have a look at an article written in 2013 by a journalist called Nick Harding. This was published in the Daily Mail, and it's about people's attitudes towards accent and dialect and generational differences between middle-aged people and younger people. And it starts off with this headline: "Why are so many middle-class children speaking in Jamaican patois? The father of an 11-year-old girl laments a baffling trend." Okay, so if I were you, I'd be stopping the video there and just trying to think, well, what's this journalist doing with language here in order to intrigue us, to grab our interest? Okay, so it's an unusual headline in that it's lengthy. I mean, most headlines are concise and compact. This isn't, so it's unusual in that respect. We've got two sentences and we've got a question that's being posed. So why are so many middle-class children speaking in Jamaican patois? So this is a bit of cataphoria that we've got here, where we've got something that is implied at the beginning, and we're being promised that an answer to this will come later on in the text. So it's a cataphoric reference. And we've got the main verb in the first sentence is are speaking. So why are middle-class children speaking? Are speaking is the main verb. It's the progressive aspect of the verb. And we note it has a certain level of certainty. So the journalist here is stating a kind of subjective idea in a very factual, objective sounding way. Okay, so it's positioning the audience to think and feel that this journalist has some kind of intense knowledge on this subject. And we've got a bit of a juxtaposition between middle-class children and that noun phrase, and then the noun phrase at the end of the sentence, Jamaican patois, where the two things seem rather incompatible. Middle-class children with all its connotations of culture and education, and then Jamaican patois, from a different culture in the Caribbean, and then the word patois, which means kind of non-standard and non-British forms of speaking. Okay. And the interrogative pronoun at the beginning, why, perhaps suggests that this article is going to give us an answer to this question. Okay, and then we've got a second sentence. A father of an 11-year-old laments a baffling trend. Okay, so it's going to be quite a personalised article by the sound of it, drawing upon the journalist's anecdotal kind of experiences. And you've got an interesting verb there, laments. So this straight away shows that this is quite a prescriptive viewpoint that's coming through here, that we are being made to feel in a negative feeling about this person's speaking style. And notice also the pre-modifying adjective here, baffling. Okay, this suggests that the language used by young people is completely baffling. It's completely indecipherable to middle-aged people. So it suggests that there's a big kind of generational gap. Okay, so it's an interesting headline that sets up the article well. And here's the first bit of it. With her ear glued to her mobile phone, my 11-year-old daughter Millie was deep in conversation, her brow furrowed as she discussed some arrangement with a friend. I listened in as I made jam in the kitchen. Lol, that's well sick, Millie said. DW YOLO. Okay, so given that you're going to be doing a piece of an opinion article yourself later on, it's interesting to note the techniques that good journalists make. Here it starts with an anecdote. So rather than beginning with a discussion about accent and dialect, it takes us into this journalist's home and it gives us some domestic detail that's going on. We've got characterization here of a young person, an 11-year-old, and we've got imagery which everybody will kind of recognize as the sort of thing that young people do with using their mobile phones. And look at the use of dialogue as well, that, Millie is being characterized here as somebody who's using a language which is very, very different from that of the journalist. So we have 6 words quoted by Millie, and quite a high percentage of them are neologisms. They are sort of stereotypically the kind of language that young people use. You've got LOL and YOLO, both of which are acronyms. You've got DW, which is an abbreviation, and then you've got this adjective sick, which here is being used in an ameliorated way, shows amelioration, meaning that it's a word that usually has a negative meaning, but here is being used as a term of approval. It's being used in a more positive way. Okay, so the dialogue there serves the purpose of demonstrating this kind of the so-called Jamaican patois and the baffling elements of this young person's language. Okay, so clicked on the wrong button there, but we're going to keep going. This indecipherable code speak, sick means awesome, DW is don't worry, and YOLO means you only live once, was delivered in an accent I could only place as somewhere between South London, downtown Los Angeles, and Kingston, Jamaica. So I said at the beginning that a lot of the pre-modifying adjectives are doing a lot of work in order to position you, the audience, to think that this person's language, this 11-year-old's language, is very puzzling and indecipherable. So there is that pre-modifying adjective, indecipherable. And code speak is an interesting way of describing language. I suppose to a certain extent we all speak in a code speak. But code speak kind of implies that it's a bit like a cryptolect, i.e. it's deliberately done in order to exclude people who are not in the chosen circle. So it's an interesting compound noun that's being used. Notice how in the brackets here we've got a kind of translation of these things that the middle class audience may be baffled by. And here we've got some kind of conjecture about where this accent comes from. Somewhere between South London, downtown Los Angeles, and Kingston, Jamaica. So they're all places that are nowhere near the home village of Ashtead in the rolling Surrey Hills, where the journalist actually lives. And he says it certainly isn't indigenous, which means native, to our home village of Ashtead in the rolling Surrey Hills. So we've got contrast and juxtaposition going on here, and we've got the implied message that the accent that she's using is inauthentic, that somehow it's not real. Okay, when Millie ended the call, she turned to me, smiled and asked, "What's for supper, please, Dad?" in perfect received pronunciation. It seems that after less than a month at secondary school, my daughter is now bilingual, but it's not French or German, in which she's suddenly fluent. Her new language, comprising alien words and abbreviations delivered with faux West Coast American inflections, will not stand her in good stead when she embarks on a school trip to visit museums in Berlin. Millie now speaks a version of what academics call Multicultural Youth English, or MYE, which she's picked up from her friends, middle-class girls from the home counties. Many well-heeled parents with children who've started secondary school this term will, like me, be familiar with this change in the way their children speak. Okay, so we've got a development of the argument here. If you go back to the first paragraph there, we've got a contrast and a juxtaposition between Millie's first dialogue, which was full of acronyms and abbreviations and, young people's language, and then we've got this so-called perfect received pronunciation. Now, received pronunciation means neutral pronunciation, phonology, where it's not immediately obvious where in the country that person comes from. Okay, what's for supper, please, in perfect standard English. Okay, and now we go on to a discussion about kind of bilingualism, and it's quite an interesting point, isn't it, that rather than talking about English and speaking French and German, that kind of bilingualism, here it's a different kind of bilingualism that we've got, which suggests that this young person is actually moderating their language, and they're shifting their language features depending on their audience. 1 minute they're speaking with, quote, a faux West Country American inflection, and the next minute they're speaking in perfect received pronunciation. Okay, so what you could argue there is that this shows elements of Howard Charles's accommodation theory. Accommodation theory is the idea that people instinctively or sometimes deliberately converge with the people that they're speaking to, or sometimes diverge away from the people that are around them. Okay. We then go into a kind of explanation about what this accent actually is. So we get the naming of it, Multicultural Youth English. And I suppose the surprising thing here is that the journalist is showing that rather than this 11-year-old daughter getting the language from TV or from the media, she's actually picked this up from her peers, from other middle class girls from the home counties. And the home counties are the counties around London that are kind of traditionally associated with kind of wealth and privilege, stereotypically. Okay, and so what he's saying here in the last paragraph is that lots of parents, this isn't something that's just special to him and his daughter and his family, that lots of parents will be in a similar position to him in that they'll be all baffled by the language of their child suddenly going to secondary school and using these different forms. Some will feel frustrated, while others will be depressed that their youngsters are conversing in what I can only describe as a clumsy rap speak, derived variously from the West Indies, Mumbai, MTV, and the American reality TV stars the Kardashians. Initially dubbed multicultural London English by linguists, this bizarre way of speaking is now creeping out of the city and into the shires, infecting children like some linguistic superbug. I greet my daughter's new vernacular with puzzled amusement. So notice the way that, again, he positions the audience, that the only way that you can respond to young people's language like this is in a negative way. You're either going to get frustrated or you're only going to get depressed. And again, we've got this pre-modifying adjective, which is positioning us to think in a negative way about the language because it's described as being clumsy. Again, like code speak, that compound noun, here we've got another compound noun, rap speak, which kind of implies that it's not a genuine, authentic way of communicating. And again, we've got a whole list here of these faraway places that this language seems to reflect. Okay, look at the imagery that's used in this paragraph here. So this bizarre, again, another adjective that's used to make us feel that this language is an alien thing. This bizarre way of speaking is now creeping out of the city and into the shires. So you've got the adverbial time there, which may alarm us. Something is happening right under our noses at this very moment. And then we've got the progressive aspect material verb creeping out of the city. So the verb there, again, gives us a feeling of something sinister, and that's built upon in the final phrase there, infecting children like some linguistic superbug. So a simile is being used, a little bit of figurative language is being used, which is presenting this language form in a highly negative way. Okay, so what you've got here is a presentation of vast differences, apparently, between different generations' use of language. So it's a really interesting use of language all through this article. And the article does go on. If you're in my group, I've printed it in the booklet on page 15, 16 and 17. And then what I've done is I've printed out some of the Daily Mail reader comments that I found on the internet after the article. So here's the first reader. Last week on Educating Yorkshire, it was hard to believe it was Yorkshire with all this daft accent going on. One girl who wanted to be an air hostess was practicing the safety announcement, and it was mostly unintelligible. It went something like this: the safety exits are here and here in it, and in an emergency, the lights will light come on in the aisles in it. And so it went on, and all delivered in about 5 seconds. The teacher said that she even writes like that. I was amazed when they said that she had passed her exams. Okay, so we've got a responder here who was worried about unintelligibility. So that young people are using language in ways that other people will not be able to understand. And particularly that's a concern in public places, in the world of occupation. If you're going to be an air hostess, there may well be problems if you're trying to do safety announcement like this, and what you say is not understandable. So you've got one concern there. I'm with Paul Weller. This is a different reader, by the way. I'm with Paul Weller on this one. I can't stand the stupid accent kids have these days. So Paul Weller is the musician from the rock group in the 1970s and 80s, The Jam, who basically says he hates the accent that young people use so much that he's not going to send his kids to state schools because he's worried they're going to be infected by this form of language. So he's going to send them off to independent schools instead. Which is interesting because Paul Weller himself uses quite a strong Cockney stroke estuary English accent. So this reader says, I'm with Paul Weller on this one. I can't stand the stupid accent kids have these days. So it's implying that all young people have a particular kind of accent, and it's kind of just insulting it by giving it that pre-modifying adjective, stupid. And it again shows that people have very strong opinions about other people's language. So you've got a very prescriptive view that comes through. Here's another reader. One reason so many of today's youth are unemployed. Ask yourselves, would you employ a dimwit who cannot speak properly? In it like bruv? BTW, I remember the historian David Starkey being lambasted on Question Time for highlighting this chav speak. Okay, so here's somebody again who is worried that young people's language is actually going to halt their progression career-wise. So he's linking together people's accent features with unemployment. Again, he's resorting to insults to people, calling somebody a dimwit. It's quite interesting. He talks about people who can't speak properly, but the language that's being used here is quite heavily non-standard. So, for example, there's the lack of the apostrophes there. So this is somebody who is writing in quite a non-standard way in terms of punctuation. And what they've done is they've used non-standard spelling features there, I dialect, in order to give the sense of somebody's accent features. In this way, to mock it. Okay. And then in contrast to that, it puts forward somebody that they are putting forward as an authority, the historian. So they're giving the term of address the historian here in order to show that we should be respecting this person. And it talks about this historian being lambasted. Lambasted means very heavily criticised on Question Time for highlighting this chav speak. Okay, so the word chav there is being used in a very pejorative way. So another highly prescriptive viewpoint. Some of these kids need a good slap. Our forefathers worked so hard to build up our civilization, and these spoilt brats think it's cool, funny and cool to sound like backward idiots. Very heavily prescriptive viewpoint there, which is recommending violence against young people. Need I say more? Okay, so this is the kind of level of comment that's out there on social media, and people responding to articles like the one that we've just been reading. And it's the sort of information that you might get on your language discourses paper 2 exam. What I would recommend that you do is that you read the entire article from the Daily Mail, as well as the points by those Daily Mail readers, and that you try and summarise the ideas expressed. So, for example, at the beginning of the article, the writer claims that his daughter speaks 2 completely different forms of English. You've got multicultural youth English with her peers and received pronunciation with her parents. Okay, so in a kind of cool, objective way, really trying to break down the argument that is being put forward. Right, we're going to have a go at doing the more creative piece of work on this. Let's assume that you've read your article. I mean, in the actual exam, you will have read 2 articles. But for the sake of argument, let's just say that we've got 1 article that we've looked at. And here is your task. Write an opinion article, about 750 words, for the Daily Mail, in which you assess the ideas and issues raised in the article and you argue your own views. Okay, so this is your chance to respond to Nick Hardy and his views about his daughter's language, and also respond to some of those Daily Mail readers. And the thing is, if you're going to do this properly in the exam, then you've got to make sure that you're lacing your argument with lots of AO2 theories and concepts. So it's not just a kind of free piece of creative writing, but you need to make sure that you are a bit of an expert. You're a linguistic expert and you know stuff about research and theories on language diversity. So you're going to be responding to different specific points in the article, but you're also going to be supporting your case with linguistic evidence. So remember the sorts of things that we've been doing so far on the first bit of language diversity. We looked at the work of William Labov and those two famous bits of research that he did in the States. That you've got the New York department store study, and you've also got the Martha's Vineyard study as well. So what does that tell us about the relationship between people's language and identity? We've mentioned already on this video about Howard Giles, he of the accommodation theory. So that is going to be surely relevant in your discussion in this article. And remember Jenny Cheshire, who did that research in Reading in 1982, I should say, on the language of young people. She's worth mentioning. And also the Milroys as well, who did that work in Belfast in the 1980s and 1990s, which looked at how language is very much built up with communities and closed communities. Okay, so make sure that you reference some of these AO2 concepts and research that you've already learnt about. And make sure also that you're writing in this entertaining journalistic style. So this is not an essay that you're writing, it's a piece of journalism. Here's an example which I prepared earlier. So you're going to need an interesting headline. Now, Nick Harding's headline was unusual, as I said, because it was very long, but most headlines are very short and concise. So here's my headline: not faking it, they're making it. So I'm hoping to intrigue my potential reader by making them think, what's he on about here? Who are they here? And what's it? So I've got some pronouns in there, which are cataphoric references. I've also got a bit of phonological effect here because I've got some rhyming going on. I've got faking and making. Paul Heselton challenges journalists' prescriptive attitudes to young people's ever-changing speech styles. Now there's your byline. Your byline has a different function to your headline. Your byline should be clear. It should demonstrate to somebody who is whizzing through articles on the net or flicking through pages in a magazine, essentially what your article is about. Get your name at the beginning of your byline and do a summary, really, of what your stance is in this article. So Paul Heselton challenges journalists' prescriptive attitudes to young people's ever-changing speech styles. So this signals that what I'm going to be doing is disagreeing quite fervently with Nick Harding's viewpoint. According to a recent article by Nick Harding in the Daily Mail, educated teens every day, all across the UK, are committing atrocities. No, not random physical attacks on the elderly, much worse. These are linguistic atrocities. So it starts off referencing the article that we've all read together, and it's using a little bit of hyperbole and a little bit of humour because it's using this hyperbolic term atrocities, and then it shows that actually what we're talking about is people using language. Notice the way that I've tried to break down the sentences and the paragraphs as well. This is not an essay, and therefore it's a good idea to occasionally stop and have very short paragraphs in order to create kind of emphasis. By which he means a clumsy rap speak derived partly from American reality TV stars, which he fears has started to infect the posh, plummy home counties RP accent of his darling daughter. So what I'm trying to do there is I'm trying to summarise, albeit in a rather biased way, I'm trying to summarise the viewpoint of this journalist, so that then I can go on and do perhaps a more serious kind of deconstruction about some of the ideas. So notice how the tone of this at the beginning is quite light, because after all, you're trying to attract people who are not linguists. These are just your average readers who are reading the Daily Mail, and they're not necessarily people who are on A-level English language courses. Such concerns are understandable, yet at the same time, this kind of linguistic prejudice must not go unchallenged. And notice that I've used the word unchallenged there because I wanted to link it in with the verb that I've used in the byline. Okay, so there's an example of the sort of way that you could set up your article at the beginning. I'm beginning to look forward to what you're going to be producing. Okay, 750 words. So if you type this, it's going to be about a side and a bit of font size 12. Let's see what you come up with. Thank you very much.